Everyone, this is Valerie Wendt with Surgent CPA Review. Welcome to our special webinar today covering the document review simulation question type that will begin appearing in the exam as early as July 1st of this year. With me is Liz Kolar, the founder of Surgent CPA Review, and she's going to spend the majority of the first part of this webinar covering that new question type, the document review simulation. After she is done, we will pause for some questions. If you have questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to enter them into the question section on your webinar tab. Once we complete those questions, we will move into a short demonstration of the Surgent CPA Review platform for those of you that may not be familiar with the platform. So again, welcome, and right now I will turn it back over to Liz. Liz?
Thanks, Val. Hello, everybody, and I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to present the document review simulation to you that is debuting on the exam starting July 1st, 2016. It's really important if you plan on taking the exam beginning this summer that you are familiar with the document review simulation. So my plan today is to take you through a full simulation from the audit section of the exam, show you the bells and whistles of the technology that surrounds the simulation, and also to give you some tips and strategies on how to solve a problem like this. So first thing I want to show you is the actual screen that you will see when you begin taking your exam. The AICPA presents you with several screens that outline the directions or instructions. Now, it's very important that you know that you have 10 minutes to get through the direction screen. If you do not complete your review of the direction screens in 10 minutes and answer your first question, you will have failed the exam. They lock you out at that point and you cannot proceed any further. So let me give you a very important tip. Before you take the actual CPA exam, I highly recommend that you go to the AICPA's website. It's aicpa.org. Specifically, you want to go to the Become a CPA section of the website and take sample tests, go through the tutorials, and read all of the directions for your particular exam section before you take the exam so that you're familiar with these instructions. It may take you a few minutes on exam day to read through them, and quite honestly, those are precious minutes that you can't afford to lose. I'd rather you spend those minutes trying to answer questions instead of reading instructions for the first time. So that's a really important tip. I strongly encourage that you do that. So if you look at the screen a little further, I just want to show you some important details. First, on the left-hand side, you can see the document review icon with the pencil symbol. That's where the question actually is going to reside in a simulation. Across the top, you have different ways that you can view your screen. So in the first mode, it's unsplit, but you can see here, by clicking the split horizontal, you can view two different screens at the same time. You could view it vertically. They also give you access to a spreadsheet function. It does not work like Excel, although they are telling us that in 2018 they will be introducing Excel on the CPA exam. You can use this as a spreadsheet tool if you need to. You're not allowed to bring in a calculator to the CPA exam, and I know this is to the dismay of a lot of students. You have to use this function here, and I'm not a huge fan of it. It's quite cumbersome, so it's something that you do need to get used to, and we do provide this calculator function in our software as well. Now, if we go back to the tab across the top, in the simulation mode of the CPA exam, you have access to authoritative literature. Now, in FAR and audit and the reg section of the exam, you do actually have to answer a question relating to the research of authoritative literature and find a particular pronouncement and give them the numbering of the pronouncement to answer the question. But you also have access to the authoritative literature to help you solve the other simulations. So if you need help in answering a particular simulation, you can click on this authoritative literature tab, type in keywords, and you may be able to find information that helps solve the question. Now, the new document review simulation is testing really a very practical skill that as newly licensed CPAs you need to have. As newly licensed CPAs, you need to be able to evaluate evidence that's presented to you. And what they're going to do on the CPA exam is provide you with documentation that you have to analyze in order to complete the document review simulation. So the documents are going to be available to you in this Exhibits tab. And you can see underneath the Exhibits tab, we have a comparative trial balance in this particular problem. And you can see if you look at the document itself, they have account numbers, account descriptions. The first set of columns is for year 6, the more recent year, and the second set is for year 5. The next document is an email from the CFO. And what I recommend when you're going through this, you actually glance at the document so you have some familiarity with what the document contains. So if I look at this document from the CFO, it says we have agreed on the terms for the purchase of our office in Edgewater Industrial Estate. So I just glance at that. I know what the document pertains to. So if I get back to the question and they ask me something about this, I know where I need to look. I move on to the accounts receivable memorandum. Now, obviously, this deals with AR, and if I look through the document, just glance at it with me. It says that December 31st, year 6, the company had an allowance for doubtful accounts balance of $456,250 compared to $82,000. That's a big jump. So this document's going to give me important information about that change in balance. And then lastly, I see a minutes of a special meeting. And the title of that agenda item says Loan to Shareholders. And so if I glance over this document, I can see that the special meeting of the Board of Directors has been called for the purpose of approving a new loan to the shareholder. So I now have a general sense of what the documents look like. If I go back to the top, there is a Help tab. Now the Help tab in this particular document review simulation is going to teach you how to solve the simulation. I strongly recommend that you don't wait until the day of your exam to learn how to answer this question. And congratulations to you because you're taking steps to actually learn how to solve it with me today. And if you practice in our software, we already have our document review simulations in our technology so that you will be very prepared when you go in to take the CPA exam. All right, so now I'm going to go back to the document review, the actual question, and I'm going to begin my attack of this problem by reading the problem. And this is something that you want to be very careful that you read everything. Take your time because this is going to set you up for success. So let's start with the top. It says a CPA firm is preparing for the year 6 audit of Hiver Company, a calendar year-end non-issuer. Now a non-issuer means that it's a non-publicly traded company. It's a privately held company. An audit staff member used the year 5 audit request list of Hiver as the basis for drafting the year 6 request list. Additional client information was obtained during the audit planning meeting with the client. So I'm just getting a fact pattern here. As the senior for this engagement, it is your responsibility to review and revise the year 6 request list for Hiver as needed. Use the additional client information for the Resources tab to revise the draft request list, correcting any errors and removing any inappropriate or unnecessary items given the overall context and purpose of the list. Ensure that your year 6 list is appropriate given the information provided. The materiality for the year 6 audit has been set at $55,000. So this next paragraph is going to tell us what we have to do. To revise the audit request list, click on each segment of underlined text below and select the needed correction, if any, from the list provided. If the underlined text is already correct in the context of the document, select original text from the list. If removal of the underlined text is the best revision to the document as a whole, select delete from the list. So we're going to go through now and actually scroll through the list. It says, please have the materials listed below ready when we arrive. Unless a different date is specifically stated, these documents should be as of and for the year ended December 31st. Now the way you do this, you have to scroll through the problem and see all the choices that you have to answer. Anything that's highlighted in blue has to be answered. So you can see there are multiple questions that we have to respond to in this problem. So I'm going to go back to the first one that came on the list. I'm going to open that item first. And notice it says the Industrial Estate Sale Contract, or the Edgewater Industrial Estate Sale Contract. That symbol that you see, that blue symbol, means that the question has not been answered. When I click on that symbol or the underlined text itself, a drop-down menu appears. These are my choices. Now, I have to review the documents to determine what's the best answer for this particular question. Was there an estate sale contract? Well, let's go back to the exhibits. First thing I want to do is look at the comparative trial balance. Did the buildings balance change at all? Well, if I scroll through this comparative trial balance, I'm going to find the buildings account. If you look very closely, do you see that the balance went up substantially? Yeah, it did. It increased by more than $2 million. So why would a building balance go up? I can assume that they purchased it, right? Do you recall anything in our reading of the documents? Was there anything else to support this transaction? Indeed, there was. If you recall, there was an email from the CFO. And if I look at that document, it tells us we have agreed on the terms for the purchase of our office in Edgewater Industrial Estate with a closing date of August 31st, year 6. We are purchasing the property from our current lessor, and therefore this will end our leasing agreement, reducing our rent expense by $5,000 each month. The agreed purchase price is at $2,287,525. All right, so I think we can comfortably say they purchased the office building in Edgewater. So I go back to the question. I look through my choices. I know the original text is incorrect. I know I don't want to delete the text because they did actually purchase. So I look through the rest of the choices, and if you can follow along with me, do you see the bottom one here, second from the bottom, the Edgewater Industrial Estate Purchase Contract is the correct choice. So I move my mouse, I select that choice, but notice too what happens to the icon next to the selection. It changes from a 3- symbol to a check mark symbol. So when you've answered the question, you should see that symbol change. The next step is to accept that answer. And when you accept it, the drop-down menu drops. It closes, and you can see, based on that, that I've completed that selection. So now I'll move to the second item, Furniture and Fixtures Purchase Documentation. It's unanswered based on the blue icon next to the statement. Let's take a look at the choices. The original text says the Furniture and Fixtures Purchase Documentation. I see delete text, Furniture and Fixture Sale, Office Equipment Purchase, or Office Equipment Sale. So now I need to go to my supporting documents. In an audit, I'm going to start out with the trial balance. I want to see, was there a change in these balances? Did the balance in Furniture and Fixtures change at all? If you look down through this trial balance, you can see that there is no change in the Furniture and Fixtures balance. They also mentioned office equipment. So let's take a look through our trial balance and see if we can find the office equipment. And did that balance change? Well, if I look at the account number 1600, no, it didn't change either. It's still 175. And because I've already looked at the other documents, I know there wasn't any other supporting information. So I'm going to go back and look at my choices again. And what do you think is the best answer here? Did they purchase or sell furniture and fixtures or office equipment? The answer is no. There was no change in any of the balances. So the best answer here is to delete the text. And what the software will do automatically is draw a line through that choice. You accept the answer, and then it closes. And you can see that you've answered that selection. So now let's move to our third choice, the new motor vehicle purchase agreement. I click on that line item, and I open it up, and I see what my choices are. They purchased the vehicle, documentation supporting the sale, documentation supporting scrapping of the motor vehicle asset, or a new motor vehicle lease agreement, and of course the option always to delete the text. So what's my pattern here? Where am I going to go? I'm going to go back to the exhibits and go to the trial balance. And let's take a look at vehicles. Can we find the vehicles balance in the trial balance? Here at the bottom, did the balance change? Count number 1,700. Well, last year the balance was 36.5. This year the balance is 0. So the balance went down. Do you recall reading any other documentation provided in the exhibits tabs relating to vehicles? And because I scanned it originally, there's no other information available. So what's the best assumption when the vehicle balance declines like that is we have to assume that they sold the vehicles. So let's go back to our choices. Which one says documentation supporting the sale of a motor vehicle? It's the third choice down. I select that. I accept it. Once I accept it, the choices collapse, and you can see the arrow. The check mark is now indicated. So I've answered that question. So now let's move on to the next one. It says documentation supporting the 2% general allowance calculation for doubtful accounts. I open that up, and boy, there are a lot of choices here, and they're very wordy. So let's see what they say. We've got the original choice, delete the text. This one says documentation supporting the allowance against the accounts receivable balance due from Janer. Documentation supporting the recovery of previously written off accounts receivable balances. Documentation supporting the 100% general allowance made against all the balances exceeding 180 days overdue. And documentation supporting the allowance against accounts receivable balance from a Fiburn company. So I'm going to go back to my trial balance, and I want to take a look at the allowance for doubtful accounts. It's account number 1205. Did that balance change substantially? And yes, if we look at the totals, it went up, way beyond the threshold of materiality of $55,000. So if I'm an auditor and I see a significant change like that, I need to find supporting documentation to support that change. Was there anything in the exhibits that dealt with accounts receivable and the allowance? Well, sure enough, we do have information to support that change. Where was it? It was in the accounts receivable memo. So now let's go through and read that memo. The first sentence says that December 31st, the company had an allowance to doubtful account balance of $456,250 compared to $82. Well, that supports what we saw in the trial balance, so that's good. The company has a standard policy in place that a full allowance is taken against any balances exceeding 180 days at year end. At December 31st, year 6, there were no amounts outstanding for longer than 180 days, and therefore the general allowance was 0. Year flag was 0. No change. That's not material. I move on to the next sentence. In year 6, the company received $2,000 from a former customer. This amount was previously written off during year 5 as it was considered to be uncollectible. Well, that report's a change. It's $2,000, so it's not material, but you know, it's something that I'd look for. But I'm going to continue to read on to see if there's anything else that is more material. At December 31st, year 6, there are concerns about the ability of Fiburn Company to pay their outstanding balance of $52,000. The concerns arose as a result of a press release issued on December 18th, year 6, which discussed the credit issues that the company is experiencing. Management has discussed their concerns with the owners, and they do not consider the issues at the time to be sufficient to require the need for any allowance in the year-end financials. I'm not convinced yet, so I'm going to read this last sentence. It says in November, year 6, Janer declared bankruptcy. Hiver had a balance outstanding of $374,250 from Janer at the time of bankruptcy and has not received any payments subsequent to this date. Management does not expect to recover any of the balance due and therefore has made a full allowance against the accounts receivable balance. Well, we have found the material item. It relates to the Janer bankruptcy. So now I go back to the question and see, did one of the choices deal with Janer? If you look, the third one from the top, documentation supporting the allowance against the accounts receivable due from Janer. is the answer that we want to choose here. Again, I accept it, and the box collapses, and you can see that the check mark is now there. So I hope you're noticing a trend. With this document review simulation, the answers are actually in the exhibits. You just have to read the exhibits. And for candidates, it can be a little concerning because it does take some time. So strategy is really important here. So let's review what my strategy is thus far. The first thing I want to do is take stock of the entire problem, look at the exhibits, familiarize myself, so when I come across a question, I know where I need to look to find the supporting evidence. If you get stuck on something, one of the benefits of these simulations is that you can guess. So if you're not sure and you really feel like you're spending too much time, you can simply guess a choice. These individual questions are graded independently, so if you get one wrong, you only lose credit on that partial question. It's not going to take points off for the entire simulation. And I mention this because I think the next one on our list is particularly difficult. It says trading securities valuation at year-end. When I look at the choices, it says trading securities, then it says available for sale valuation, equity method investment valuation, joint venture valuation, subsidiary company valuation. This particular one is a definite crossover to the FAR section of the exam. They're really testing not only your knowledge of auditing, but also your knowledge of accounting and of GAAP. So we always recommend to our candidates that in terms of the order of the exam, you should take FAR first, because FAR is the foundation of GAAP. You need to know GAAP in order to audit financial statements. And the audit section of the exam can test GAAP. And this is a perfect example of how they do it. So I'm going to follow the procedures that I've showed you thus far. I'm going to go to the trial balance, and I'm going to look for investments. There's something about available for sale, something about trading. And if you scroll down through the trial balance, account number 1800, do you see investments in securities? It went down. It was $400,000 last year. It was $325,000 this year. So the balance declined. Now, as I scroll through this trial balance, I see another account that's important in answering this question. It's account number 3400. Has other comprehensive income. And it went up by $75,000. So it's a debit in OCI. So can this be a trading security question? No. Other comprehensive income is not recorded when trading securities are valued. Trading security valuations go right through the income statement, gains or losses, because management intends to sell them off in the short term. We use other comprehensive income to record gains and losses when evaluating available for sale securities. So this question pertains to available for sale, and if I go back to my choices, you can see it's the third one from the top. There's no evidence that it relates to an equity method investment, a joint venture, or subsidiaries. The best choice here is available for sale. So of all the ones that we've looked at thus far, I think that one would be the hardest for candidates to answer. So let's move on to the next one. It says documentation supporting the issuance of 50,000 shares of 30-cent per share stock. I'm going to open it up. And I see, oh boy, lots of choices. Could it be 150,000 shares at 10 cents, 20 cents, 30? They're all over the place. So what do I do? Let's first go to the trial balance. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for the stock accounts. Did the balance in the stock accounts change? Well, if you look at account number 3,000 and 3,100, you'll see that they both went up. Let's look at common stock. It went up by $5,000. Additional paid-in capital went up by $10,000. And they tell you that the capital stock has a 10-cent par value per share. So what I'd like to do is let's test the stock. It's clearly the case that they issued stock. But let's test their choice and see if the math works. They told us in the original choice that it was 50,000 shares issued for 30 cents a share. Well, that would mean cash would have been debited for 15,000. Common stock would have been credited for 5,000, the 10-cent par, and that means additional paid-in capital would have been credited for $10,000. And so common stock would have gone up for 5, additional paid-in capital would have gone up for 10, and indeed that's what's happening in this problem. So here's an example where we would select the original text. Okay, so what's the approach there? When you have a lot of numbers like that, test the answers. That's the best advice I can give you. The answer is there, you just need to prove it. So let's move on to the next one. Management's review of third-party loan interest rates. I can honestly say I don't recall seeing anything like that in the problem. So let's look at the choices. It says the original choice, delete the text, the copy of the loan agreement with J. Hiver, the copy of the loan agreement with M. Moore, evidence of approval by D-Chain for the loan to J. Hiver, and management's due diligence work relating to providing the loans. All right, so I'm going to go back to the supporting documentation because I do recall seeing something about a loan, and that was in the minutes of the special meeting. So if we read through this document, it says the special meeting of the Board of Directors has been called for the purpose of approving a new loan to a shareholder. Management routinely provides loans to shareholders when requested in prior periods. There is a current loan balance outstanding related to M. Moore. The outstanding balance will be $25,000. Remember, the threshold was $55,000 for materiality. The loan will be paid in full by July 31st, year 7. J. Hiver has made a request to management for a loan of $225,000. Well, there you go. That's the material item. The monthly loan repayments will commence on January 1, year 8, over 20 months. Repayments in equal installments of $12,500. The loan will be interest-free. Clearly related party transaction. So was there a choice related to J. Hiver? There was, and there's no mention of third-party interest rate loan rates in this particular document. So when I go back to the choice, I know the original choice is not correct. What's the best choice here? It's the copy of the loan agreement with J. Hiver. I select that choice, and I move on. I'm down finally to the last question in this problem. It's an account expense analysis. And here they give us 4 different accounts, 6900, 6806, 7115, and 7500. Where are we going to go, guys? We're going to go to the trial balance, right? You get the hang of this? So in a trial balance, it's listed in account number order. So the expenses usually reside at the bottom of the trial balance. So you can see here, if I just box out the main expenses, the range of expenses they gave us in the problem, 6806, 6900, 7115, 7500. I'm going to look at the balances in each one of these accounts and see what happened. So 6806, no change. The balance is 2400 and 2400. Sundry expense, account number 6900. It's a small change, a small decrease from 940 to 890. All right, so let's find 7115. That's postage expense, 590 to 670. Would I be worried about any of these accounts thus far? As an auditor, no, they're small, they're immaterial. So let's go down to 7500. And what do you see? The balance was 14.5. Now it's 62,000. That's a big jump. That's material. So that is the account that has the most significant change, and that's the account that I want an expense analysis of. I select that choice, accept the response. It changes to a check mark, and I've answered the last question. Now, I want to be sure that you take a moment before you submit the problem to review all the choices and make sure that you've answered every single question. My concern is that these icons they're using on the exam they're very small, and there's a slight difference between an unanswered question and an answered question. So just scan the entire problem and make sure there's a check mark next to every single choice. Okay? Be sure you have answered every item. because these questions are usually pretty easy to answer, and I would hate to have you lose points just because you overlooked an item. It's also really important that you keep an eye on the clock throughout the exam. This document review simulation will appear in the last section of the CPA exam for FAR, audit, and regulation. They're not going to be introducing document review simulations to the BEC exam. The BEC exam will not have simulations until the exam changes in April of 2017. So timing is important. The multiple choice questions are divided amongst 3 testlets. Those testlets contain either 24 to 30 questions based on the part that you're in, and the multiple choice questions are actually adaptive. So the first testlet of multiple choice questions contains the easiest questions you'll probably see on the exam. When you move on to the second testlet, those questions may be more difficult if you're doing well. And then the third testlet could be even more difficult if you've done well on the first and second. So I recommend candidates budget their time, maybe 30 minutes or a minute per question in the first testlet, and then a minute and a half to 2 minutes on the second and third testlet multiple choice questions. So by the time you get to the simulations, you have plenty of time in your bank to actually spend some time solving these questions. In FAR and audit, you will get 7 simulations. 1 of them will be a document review simulation. 5 of them will be basic task-based simulations, and 1 of them is going to be that research question that I mentioned where you have to find a pronouncement in the authoritative literature. What I recommend is that you open every single question that's in the simulation 4th testlet and assess each question, determine what you like and what you think you can do well on and what you don't think you're going to do well on. So I want you to triage. Putting aside the authoritative literature research question, take the 6 questions that are given that are computational and triage them. 2 you like the most, do first. 2 that you feel semi-confident on, do next. And save the 2 that you feel weakest about to the very end. So that you're doing questions in the beginning that you know you're going to get as many points as possible. And if by chance you run out of time at the end of the exam, you're working on a question that you might not have been able to get full credit for anyway. Now the examiners have introduced new software to the exam. One of the things they're doing is enhancing the clock. So I don't know if this is good or bad, but at the 2-minute mark, your clock's going to turn red, and they're going to start to show you seconds. So I'm hoping at this point you have submitted your exam already and you're not running the clock down to just seconds, but they're trying to make it clear for candidates that they can see the clock, the time really dwindling down to 0. So be careful, watch that clock. You will submit the testlet by submitting the upper right button once you've answered all the simulations, and that will conclude your exam. And I have finished my document review simulation. So now I'm going to ask if you have questions. Val?
Thanks, Liz. One of the questions that came up while you were presenting is, are there going to be other types of document review problems, or are they going to be like this one that you've demonstrated?
Well, this is an audit one, so the FAR and regulation will be different. The AI CPA does have a sample of a FAR simulation, document review simulation on their website, and a reg question, and they're very different. This was an audit evidence question, so you had to review documents to determine if the selection was appropriate. But in FAR and reg, you may be asked to do more computations.
Great. Another question came in wanting to know if we were going to be offering any lectures or notes in our platform on the document review. I did answer that question saying that we've already got this question type into our software. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to that?
We will have videos that students can watch, just like I showed you today, on how to solve the simulations that we've included in our database. So some of our videos are instructional, that we're teaching content, and some of the videos that we have do show students how to solve the simulations.
Okay. Another question came in wanting to know, let me get to it, Is a candidate able to pick the order of the simulations that they work?
Yes. So in the simulation mode, when you get to the 4th testlet of your exam, you, in this current version of the CPA exam, will be able to see all 6 or 7 simulations. They are divided by tabs, and you can access them at the bottom of your screen. Let me bring up that slide. You see down at the bottom where it's directions, I've got the number 5 highlighted. So those would be questions that you'll be able to answer in the 4th testlet. So the simulation testlet is the only testlet where you actually can see the entire area. When you do multiple choice questions, you get to open one question at a time. Here you can see everything before you submit it. And that's where I recommend that you actually look at each question and determine where you feel you're stronger. And as I said, do a triage. Pick 2 that you like the best and do those first. 2 that you're moderately comfortable with, do next. And then 2 that you feel the weakest in, do last. And I also recommend the research question, maybe saving till the end. The problem with the research question for some candidates is they can't find the exact rule quickly, and they get caught in that problem and they spend too much time on it. And it's an exam experience, so you're generally stressed before you even begin the test. If you are working for a research question and you can't find the answer, what I know happens to candidates is they start to panic. And when you panic, you can't think straight. The research question is not worth that many points to get panicked over, so make sure you answer all the other sims that require computations or this document review sim, and then move on to the research question at the very end.
And somewhat related, the question came in wanting to know if all 5 of the simulations will be document review.
Oh, no, absolutely not. We have been told by the AI CPA that one of the questions will be a document review simulation. So they plan to continue to use the same task-based simulations that they've been using for years, and those will continue to be the majority of the simulations in the 2016 version of the exam. Now, is it possible you could get more than 1 DRS? I would say yes, it's possible. The Board of Examiners always has in each section of the exam pre-test questions, experimental questions that don't count. And so we know they have to build their database of document review simulations, so you may get one that is experimental that doesn't count. Unfortunately, though, you don't know which one of those would count and which one would not count, so you want to make sure you answer them as thoroughly as possible. In fact, across all 4 sections of the exam, 15 to 20% of the questions are experimental. So what I mentioned earlier was that if you get a question and you don't know how to answer it, don't spend a lot of time on it, just guess. It could be one of those questions that didn't count. And also, if it's a multiple choice question, you do have 4 choices, and you could guess, and you may guess correctly. You have a 25% chance of guessing right. So you should adopt that strategy when you do not know how to answer a question. The CPA exam is positively graded. It's not negatively graded. So if you guess incorrectly, you don't get points off. You just don't get credit for a correct score.
And it's probably safe to say, Liz, if you agree, that they may not even see a document review simulation on the exam starting in July. They're saying that the potential is there that they could start seeing them. They're not guaranteed to see one.
Correct.
Okay. Question came in wanting to know, will all of the audit sim documents be similar to the one you shared today regarding the preparing of an audit and gathering evidence?
No, I wouldn't say that they'll all look like this. The AICPA has not shared what they expect the simulations to all look like. We at Surgent have drafted additional problems based on the information they have provided, and so you have to think of what could possibly happen in an audit. You may be asked to evaluate a bank reconciliation, or an audit program, or a flow chart, or an internal control questionnaire. There are so many different scenarios that could be presented. It's important that when you're studying, that you really do understand the theory so that you could apply it to any question format that they ask the question in.
Okay. Question came in, are some simulations worth more than others? Meaning, are there ones that you suggest going for first?
They do not tell us what individual simulations are worth. They do tell us that the overall subset of simulations, the fourth testlet, is worth 40% of your grade. So if a question has 3 answers compared to a question that has 10 possible answers, we would venture to guess that the question that has 10 possible answers is worth more than the question that only had 3 possible answers. I continue to go back to my recommended strategy. Answer the questions that you feel most comfortable with first. Try to answer the questions that you're going to get the most points for first, and then work your way through that entire testlet to earn points as you go.
Okay. Another question came in with regard to simulations. Do the research simulation questions, are they weighted less than the other simulation questions? I don't know that we know that specifically.
Again, they have not told us that what it's specifically worth. We can surmise that it's not worth as much as something like this that I went over with you today, because it simply is a one-question sim. You know, you have to find in the pronouncements, if this was FAR, for example, how to account for the impairment of goodwill. And so you would go into the search and type impairment of goodwill, and up would come the authoritative pronouncement that discusses that, and you have to enter the codification number into the solution. So it's just, since it's just a one-question answer and it's a relatively simple task, you know, I'm quite amazed that they actually give you credit for it, because, you know, in the real world, it's something that we all do. We don't memorize all these things. We look stuff up all the time. And I think it's a task that so many people know how to do. I'm actually surprised that they're still giving credit for it personally. So I wouldn't stress over that particular feature. You know, I think the task-based sims that we've been discussing are more significant to your overall grade. And remember, passing's a 75, so you can get things wrong and still pass.
Correct. And somebody wants you to restate the breakdown of the simulation testlet specifically for FAR.
Sure. The simulation testlet in FAR contains 7 questions, 7 task-based simulations. We expect in July that 5 of them will be similar to the task-based simulations they have been asking for years. 1 of them will be a document review simulation, this new format that I showed you today, and 1 of them will be a research question.
Okay, that was the last question. If there are any other questions that you'd like to ask Liz, you can go ahead and submit those to that question box. I think we've had a really great response, Liz.
Well, thank you, everybody. I greatly appreciate you spending some time with me this afternoon. And keep an eye out. We'll be doing some more of these webinars. My plan is to do a similar document review simulation webinar on the FAR sim and the reg sim, so that'll be coming out in the coming days. We'll send those announcements to you so you can see how we solve those as well.